firms say to me, why should I invest in marketing? And I'm like, I'm not going to sell you on why you should invest in marketing. I'm a firm believer that marketing can be a growth engine for a law firm. And if you don't think that marketing is going to help you grow or achieve your goals, I'm not going to convince you otherwise.
Sharp strategies, sweet success. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sharp Strategies, Sweet Success. I'm your host, Tifiny Sswdensky, and I'm here today talking with Ron Latz. Ron and I actually kind of met on LinkedIn. We both run in the same circles and talk a lot about the same stuff. And I can't remember if you reached out to me or I reached out to you, but we finally got connected and met and got to know each other a couple weeks ago. And I later invited him here on the podcast. Ron is a legal marketing strategist and a fractional CMO for law firms, so he does similar work to me. And today we're going to talk about whatever we talk about within that category. Um, so I'll let Ron introduce himself, and we'll get started from there.
Well, I appreciate that, Tiffany. And we did, in fact, have this relationship that was started on LinkedIn just from comments and reacting to each other's posts. We talk a lot about legal marketing and technology and what works, what doesn't, managing vendors. So there's a lot in common there. I've been in this space now, well, come January, 15 years. So there's been a lot that has changed and many things that still have not changed. And I look forward to going down whatever rabbit hole that you want to. I think it'll be some good conversation about what some firms can do and maybe avoid to make sure that their marketing is effective and they're driving the returns that they're looking for.
I myself only got started in legal marketing back in like 2014, 2015. So you've been in the space a little bit longer than me. Can you talk about like what's different in legal marketing or marketing in general compared to when you started to today?
Yeah, I mean, I started at Reuters with FindLaw, where I was, selling marketing and advertising services to lawyers. And, back then you could throw up a 10 to 15 page website, do blogs every other week, and maybe get a directory listing on FindLaw. Or then Avo was really in its prime and rising in prominence, and you could dominate a market. That is certainly not the case in 2024 and heading into 2025, where content can be seen as more of a commodity, a lot of AI generated content. People are trying to take some shortcuts to fast track success, but there's been firms that have been at this for a decade plus and even longer that had really solidified their place in the search results pages. And that makes it even more competitive. So there's always a challenge. I think there's still resistance to some technology, even though the pandemic did accelerate the adoption of like online scheduling and online payment tools and things like that. But there's still a little bit of room to grow there. And for whatever reason, we still have many firms that just don't answer their phones, right? Like that hasn't really changed. I think that, again, technology has helped that. There's a lot of overflow after hours services that have somewhat bridged the gap for some of the more forward-thinking firms. But, I think 2024 Clio Trends report, like it was a regression from the 2019 report around how many firms are actually missing most of their calls. So that's unfortunate, to say the least.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, the intake process is always like a really tough thing to solve for law firms because in my experience, it's tough for them to realize that there's an issue, and then sometimes it's tough for them to get over the mental hurdle of needing like a full-time like intake person and setting up those systems. Um, do you work with firms on their intake processes, or how are you involved in that kind of department?
I think similar to you, we can act as a neutral third party because it's sometimes difficult, or at least the position that agencies are put in is somewhat difficult when they're pointing the finger to the firm to say, hey, like you're missing 15 to 20% of your phone calls. And if the firm doesn't even have a tool in place to track that type of stuff and just automatically blames the agency or says like the marketing is terrible or we need more leads, things like that, it's hard to pinpoint it. So, you and I can kind of guide the firm and say, hey, listen, like we're looking at the data. We see that there's a gap or you have a leak in your funnel. Like let's pump the brakes a little bit before we go and spend thousands of more dollars to try to fix what we think is a lead problem, which is really possibly just a people or a process problem. So while I'm not going in and completely overhauling like procedural workflows from like the people perspective, I can at least highlight where there is a gap and then bridge that conversation between agency and law firm so that it is amicable and that we're all rowing in the same direction to solve what is it's really a problem for both sides.
One thing I've noticed as a fractional CMO is like the higher you climb like the leadership chain or how big your title gets, the less actual marketing you do. And so like I know like me, like I find myself looking at like processes, tags, and all of that stuff, not traditionally like what you think of as marketing. Has it been similar for you, or what's your experience been there?
In my fractional engagements, a little bit because they'll have like a team in place that I'm either helping build from scratch or just find other pieces to complement the pieces that they already have in place. Um, I also do a lot of consulting work, which is where I get to kind of flex more of the creativity that like I sometimes miss that, but it's a balance between both. So I kind of get to get best of both worlds, if you will.
Yeah. What's been like your biggest challenge as a fractional CMO? I guess just in general, maybe it's like working with the attorneys or like something like running your own business. Like what have been your hurdles here of late?
Um, you know, I would say that the firms that I go into and just really didn't have like a sound strategy in place that were based off of like what the business wanted to achieve or like whatever the goals or objectives were for any given year or quarter, whatever it may be. Um, you know, just getting in at the ground level to ensure that the relationships and the partners that they have in place know the target that we're trying to hit. uh, One of the bigger challenges is just coming in and like resetting some, I don't want to say misaligned, but inaccurate expectations, if you will. Right? Like they were under the impression that, like, listen, you turn on ads and overnight you get business, or an SEO investment where they just started and they were kind of promised the world, or they thought that things were gonna, you know, pick up or start generating results in a time frame that just really wasn't realistic given their level of investment or like competitive market dynamics, things like that. So again, because now I'm not selling those marketing products or those marketing solutions, if you will, from an ad, SEO, or website design or development perspective, I can just say, hey, listen, like I understand that maybe that was the case initially, but like we've got to look at the facts as they are right now. And we either make the adjustments and temper our expectations, or we reallocate that spend into a channel in which you think you can sustain the investment and kind of have the patience to get the results to start coming through the door.
You know. I have an email newsletter list that I'll send emails to. I try to once a week, but sometimes I don't have time. But one thing I wrote about yesterday was talking about search engine optimization. Is this idea of like one, the timeline, and two, like the expectations and how like little things that a SEO vendor can say can be like wildly misunderstood by the attorney.
There's low hanging fruit that can be picked up, right? Like you go in and you see that they don't even have a category within their Google business profile. Like that can, they say, oh, well, what do you mean that takes forever? No, that's a very short turnaround. You could probably start getting uh, results from that type of change almost immediately because you're properly labeling the category in which you are practicing. I love it when you go into a WordPress site and they still leave the homepage title tags as home or WordPress or whatever it may be. Like those are just some like basic 101 mistakes that, yeah, any SEO that knows what they are doing is going to go in there and make those adjustments or identify broken links and 404s and improper redirects, like all the Geek Squad stuff that we like to just go in and look into each little nook and cranny to just get from a very baseline, just like, let's fix this stuff and get that in order. No, that doesn't take 6, 9, or 12 months to change. Sure. But like, if you're in a competitive market, let's say you're in personal injury, or everyone uses those examples, even if you're in divorce or criminal, and you're trying to go after DUIs and like, you don't have like some of the primary pillar pages or your evergreen content isn't there. You've got to get those pages written. They've got to be a certain length. You've got to try to build backlinks to them. Like, that's not going to take 2 or 3 weeks, right? And those are the things that, typically when they're saying like SEO is a long-term investment, like that's what they're really, really talking about.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And then like there are instances where, and I see SEO companies do this where they ask the attorney, hey, what keywords do you want to rank for? And take the keywords the attorney gives and just tracks those keywords. Doesn't do additional research to see like, are these popular keywords for this area? Like, is anyone using these? Does it make sense? And, because like those really like niche or like underused keywords are easy to rank for. And so like that's one I think I talked about in the newsletter yesterday. And so there are so many things in SEO that are just like that, where it's just like, you think you get it, but it's actually like a fair bit deeper than just like, you know, I want to rank for personal injury attorney, Houston, Texas. How often do people type in that whole phrase into Google? Not really that often, right?
Well, also you can manipulate reports to look really good and up and to the right based off of, like to your point, like depending upon keyword volume, right? There could be some terms that no one is really searching for, but you can optimize for them, and you could see that you're going from page 3 to 2 to 1, or just immediately to page 1, and in your whatever report they are sending you, it could make it look like there's some significant progress being made, but at the end of the day, like they're not capturing more qualified opportunities and leads or wanted cases or signups. And I think that's where the rubber really meets the road. Like that's where there's so many skeptical and jaded lawyers out there because they've been burnt in the past and they don't really believe the SEO agency anymore. And I think like I really enjoy that part of being fractional because it's almost like a translator or being a mediator between both sides, because you want to ensure that like both sides are getting the best of it. The agency is very happy when we are in place and we can set the expectations properly with the firm. And they're like, wow, this is now working. I want to spend more money. I want to invest more dollars with this agency. And it takes time to get there. But I think that's where, maybe I know that I'm biased, but that's where I think that we do get the appreciation from both sides. And then there's the reverse of it where the agencies think that we're in there just to like come in and have this massive change management efforts and get, our agencies in place. But I think that there's things that people can do to ensure that they are doing what is in the best interest of the firm and that business interests are in alignment there.
Oh, that's a great point. And like I know myself, like I go out of my way sometimes to reassure the law firm's employees, their vendors. And at this point I worked with most of my vendors for a long time, so they know who I am and what I'm about. But like I have to reassure them a lot, like I'm not after your job. Like I'm not here to replace you as an SEO. I'm not here to replace you as a marketing coordinator. I have my own business. I do my own thing. And I mean, do you have that similar experience? Do you have to like reassure people, or are you just like, you know,
No,
disregarding it?
no, for sure. I mean, one of the ways that I do it is that regardless of like whatever agency or partner or consultant that I refer business out to, like I take a completely and purely neutral perspective. And like, I don't take any kickbacks or affiliate fees or commissions on that. I'm not knocking anybody that does, as long as they disclaim that to the client, right? But if they're taking a vig on the back end and not letting the client know, like you're giving that business to that agency or that individual because it lines up your pockets, right? I think that that's where there's a significant conflict of interest, right? You can make especially in my consulting arrangements, right? Like I'll recommend 2 or 3 different agencies that I think are going to work well for you. A, I believe they do a good job. B, you need to vet them out to see if there's cultural fit, right? You've got to vibe with that individual in order to make the decision that you're going to like trust that individual. Fractional will have a little bit more influence because they've essentially outsourced the entire management of like those projects to me, but I'm still bringing them in, right? Because if and when the time comes for us to part ways and I give them the keys because they've got a machine running, they have to pick up where we left off, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I early when I started fractional CMO stuff, like I got many offers for like referral fees and kickbacks and stuff like that. And ultimately I decided not to. One, because I was kind of lazy that day and didn't want to fill out the partnership agreement. And looks two, like it does like dilute your authority. Like if you're getting paid by a company and you're recommending them as a vendor, like whether or not you're being objective about it, like if somebody knows that, they're gonna automatically, just think you're in cahoots or whatever. So I agree with you. I do think that's important. Although again, like I'm not knocking anybody who does like kickbacks or cross promotions, but that's just not it it dilutes the authority of a fractional CMO, in my opinion.
I don't have a problem with it. I just think that the client should be aware of it. And if the client is then made aware, it's the same thing with like giving up access to systems or tools, right? Like before they sign, just let them know what they are giving up, right? If they are okay with it and they understand and it wasn't smoke and mirrors, like it's very transparent, this is what is happening, no problem. The firm should know what they are signing up for. Like ads is a perfect example. There is a benefit to some firms that like where the agency is running everything through their MCC. Benefit, right? They're funneling millions of dollars through that. Like the improved economies of scale and like decrease in cost can be a benefit to the firm. They just need to know, like, listen, when you do part ways with us, if that happens, and then go start out at your own, like your costs are going to increase, your acquisition costs are going to increase. Like you're going to be starting from scratch. You're not going to have like a high quality score. Okay. They just should know. That's my take on that. And I know that many disagree with it. But again, I just think it's all about making sure that they know what they're getting into before they hit the dotted line.
Yeah. I have a few questions, but you mentioned earlier in the podcast, so I want to ask, so I don't forget.
Mhm.
What you mentioned hiring and hiring for marketers. Like, what are some of your tips for hiring marketers? I that comes up a lot when I talk to attorneys and just how to find the right person. Like, how do you do it? What strategies do you use?
I'm really involved in like building out the job description, right? Just like many times they're looking for someone that is, I'll say at night, like a utility player, if you will. Like they want them to do social and SEO and PR and communications and write content and do the newsletter. And it's like, how many people are we hiring here? Like law firm? That's one thing. So like, again, narrowing it down, like, do we need a generalist or do we need a specialist? That's where I think like the most value can be provided because they think like, listen, I'm just going to get my niece or my nephew who graduated college, knows how to use TikTok and bam, social media is taken care of. That may or may not be the case, but like an example of where you're like, oh, I got my cousin that can go and develop the website.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, can they really do that? And then just in the interviewing process, I'm doing more of like the technical assessment to see if like they actually know what they're talking about. They can share examples of how they use these tools to help improve campaigns and specific initiatives and things like that. But then I make sure that they're the ones having the conversation about values alignment, cultural fit. Like, again, you've got to vibe with these people because they are part of the team and they still report to you day to day, right? Like I'll have a weekly sync. They'll be involved in like vendor discussions if they're going to help complement them, but you've got to make sure everyone's on the same page about what it is they're actually going to do. And what a successful hire looks like at the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said what you said at the beginning about, narrowing down the scope of the job description. Because a lot of law firms will use that generalist template, which includes SEO, PPC, and a bunch of like different stuff that don't necessarily have the same skill set. And like people see what they want to see in job descriptions. And so if somebody is looking for an SEO job, they're going to apply for that role, even though you're already working with an SEO company and their day to day won't look like SEO. And so, like, I just want to echo, like, how important it is to craft an accurate and honest job description. Otherwise, you're going to attract people who want a totally different job. Yeah.
And when you are putting that job description and all those responsibilities together, right? Like, make sure the comp matches what you are asking them to do, right? Like we talked about like the utility player there. And if they are experienced and they can do a lot of these things that you are asking, hey, I think you're still setting them up for failure. But putting that aside, like this isn't a $45,000-$55,000 job. Like you have to match like their responsibilities and their experience with the comp, or put like incentives in place. And I think, we're in a unique position where we can at least give them some solid feedback, having been in the industry as long as we have, to say like the market rate for this individual is not what you've put into this job description. And then you just, you go back to the drawing board if it doesn't make sense.
Have you worked with the law firm where you had to say like the employee isn't doing what they think they're doing, or their skill set isn't a right match for this job? Have you ever had to have that conversation?
Yeah, we've had the conversation where, I think that the expectation of what that individual could do and can do was a little bit off base. Like they are responsible for doing certain parts of marketing that they don't have that skill set, right? Like you work with an agency, they have like very specific subject matter expertise, especially with like building ad campaigns or designing landing pages or running SEO campaigns, right? Someone that is fresh out of school or just has jumped into marketing and they're playing more of the coordinator role, like you can't have them in the back end of the ad platform running and managing those campaigns. I mean, you can, but they're probably not going to be as successful as you had hoped for. So it's just like you might save a couple of bucks, but getting a professional in place, like that's what makes sense. And if you don't have the budget to do that or to sustain the required investment, like again, we go back to the drawing board and figure out what we need to do to get the visibility or drive the qualified leads that we're looking for somewhere else. So they ask, and that happens a lot with vendors. Like, are they doing what we think that they should be doing? Some of them are, some of them are not. And then, helping the client have that conversation so that they can like articulate what it is that they want them to do. That happens much more frequently.
I mean, a lot of times, like when I'm evaluating vendors, like I try to be mindful. I don't exactly have marketing agency experience, because Great Legal Marketing wasn't a marketing agency, and it was more coaching consulting, right?
Mhm.
And so I never worked in an agency, but I know the challenges agencies face because they're working with a ton of different people. And, hopefully they have enough employees to service all those people. I'm assuming they do. And, everyone has different kind of expectations for what an SEO company might do. And so, some people are asking for work to be done that doesn't necessarily need to be done, or or just timelines. People always want their website redesigned shorter, faster. They want it done in 30 days instead of 90 or 120. But, the reality is that, there are so many things that could come up when redesigning a website that it is very easy for that project to go on for 6 months instead of, 2 or 3. Um, so, where was I going with that? So yeah, like I try to be mindful of what agencies go through and not like just be an asshole just to be an asshole. But you do have to like very carefully watch what they're doing, because some of them, once you're done going through the sales process, a lot of SEO companies will basically send you to their white label SEO company who's actually doing the work on their behalf. And then after that, it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, I think that's where, I mean, some of my experience working for like an incredibly large agency and then a smaller boutique agency, where I was building a team and had individuals that were managing specific accounts and things like that comes into play when they're evaluating either their current agency or looking at alternatives, right? Like that's a conversation that happens very frequently with my consulting clients. And then once, I mean, on the fractional side, it does too, but many times like those players have been either a little bit more established or in place for a while so that they're accustomed to how they work or they've had experience with many and now they find one that they feel comfortable with. But if, you had an in-house resource and you were accustomed to somebody like essentially supporting you 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then you go to a larger agency where it's an account management model, and that individual is responsible for managing anywhere between 25 to 50 to 75 different accounts. Like their level of responsiveness is going to be very, very different. You also hit on a really key point about what I try to do with my clients is encourage them to speak with individuals on the team, like the subject matter experts, and not just the sales individuals, right? Because many times, most times, that's not the person that you're going to interface with on a day-to-day basis. So, I know that I did this at the agency when I was overseeing customer success. If an individual firm wanted to speak with, like, who's the person running the ads or who leads that team, or do I have access to the leadership team, or like the person that's running my account, have they been in legal, or like how much experience do they have with the agency? Like, do they know who to go to when it hits the fan? Or like, what is the escalation process? Like, what is that? How frequently are you going to be speaking with us? Is that through a Zoom? Do we do is it over email? Do we have like a Slack channel? Just so that again, like, okay, now we sign on the dotted line. You're going to get handed off to somebody else. Like, what should I expect from here on out? So like, I try to tell them to, get that as much as they can. And some agencies oblige and others say no, and the firm makes the decision accordingly.
Yeah. What is the biggest like SEO mistake you come across or discovered or seen in your clients or somebody you've consulted with? Like, have you come across like any like, oh no, they did that, like, or anything like that?
Like, yeah, but I mean, it's kind of like it's the one-on-one stuff that we look at, and it's like you don't have title tags, or they're completely branded, or there's like no like tagged or labeled H1s, or like the links that are supposed to go to internal pages are broken or go to a wrong page. Like I've looked at some sites where they're more general practice firms and the PI uh, landing page like link goes to a real estate video, right? Or something just completely out of whack. Just some of the things that there's lacking attention to detail, you know, CTAs that don't like the buttons don't work, or, pages are labeled as no index. That type of stuff. Like, you run into that and you give the agency the benefit of the doubt if it's just like on one page, or like it's just like it's not just glaring mistake after mistake after mistake. Like, listen, this stuff happens. There's so many moving parts. Um, and sometimes like you have someone at the firm behind the scenes that's got WordPress access and they're like tinkering around with stuff and moving things around that they shouldn't be, or like adding keywords or trying to negative out stuff in an ads campaign. And you're like, you just blew this thing up. Um, and again, we can at least talk to them about some of those things, because like I've seen it where like on the agency side, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. Um, we get to be the bearer of bad news in that situation and just be like, hey, listen, like you made a mistake. You made a mistake. It's all right. They're in place, like they're gonna help us fix it. But just know that it wasn't them. And if it was them, like give them the opportunity to change it. And like if it doesn't get changed or adjusted like week after week after week, like maybe it is time to try to find somebody else.
Yeah. You mentioned somebody tinkering on the website, and I'll circle back to what you said earlier about like generalist job descriptions. If somebody was hired for your firm with the job description that includes SEO responsibilities, and they show up and try to do SEO, don't be surprised, and if they're not skilled enough or they're just trying to learn, they could make a big mistake, and maybe they're doing it because they remember that was on the job description and feel pressured to do something. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to tinker around in WordPress or a website, make it your own website, something you build and mess around with and learn from. Or, just be very, very cautious about what you do.
Yes. Yes. Or ask someone. Just run it by them if you're really unsure, especially like when you're behind like WordPress engine or Cloudflare, like these things where like you're swapping out links or you're moving things from staging to production. It's just like there are people that do this all day, every day. Just run it by them, right?
Yeah.
For someone trying to take initiative, but when you've invested months of time into projects, you just want to make sure that you don't inadvertently do something that could erase all of that hard work.
So, just out of curiosity, like, have you ever talked to a firm that said, like, we want to grow, but we don't want to grow that much?
Yeah, I just say, well, how much is how much? Is it like you want to add on another attorney? Do you want to add on 2 or 3 office locations? Are you looking to bolt on another practice area? Like what does growth mean to you? It's more common where I get, we want to grow and we want to decrease the marketing budget. And I'm like, well, that's probably not going to work. That's if we want to grow, we usually have to invest in growth. And I've run into that more frequently over the past 15 years. And it's just, that's the dream. Sure, let's grow and we don't have to spend another dollar. Like the firms and the agencies or the fractionals that figure out how to do that for firms, like they've got it. They've got the silver bullet. Like come hit, let me know. They won't share the secret sauce, I guess, but let me know how you can do that. But that's more frequent for me.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever dealt with somebody who's like, well, this person said they could do this. I mean, maybe it comes up, and I typically pretty confidently tell them it's like, go work for them then, or go work with them then. And like what they typically discover and what I've seen time and time again is that a lot of people overpromise and underdeliver. And so like, when you're the person who says like that can't be done or it can't be done that way, you kind of come off as a curmudgeon. But maybe you're just being honest about the limitations. And so, like, I've run up against that, I guess, a few times. Somebody has said, well, this agency said they could do this. And all I can say is like, I've been doing this for 10 years and I've never seen anyone pull that shit off. And I don't know. Do you have to like, you already said like, we have to be the bearer of bad news. Like, do you struggle with that? Like getting them to just like trust just because this one guy you met in a bar said he could do it doesn't mean he can actually do it. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of experience dealing with that just because of my sales roles, where like I would come in and say like, this is what we can do and how we would do it and what the expectation should be. And they say, well, the guy next door can do it for half the cost or twice as fast. And it took me a while to take this approach, but I just eventually said, okay, so let him do it. I'm not going to sell against that. I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. I have conviction that that's not the case based off of my experience. And what's amazing about that approach is when they then go and do it or try to do it and exactly what I said happens, it looks like I had a crystal ball,
Yeah.
right? It looks like, oh, wow. Like that's why in those instances, like now, even with, I don't want to convince you otherwise, I would rather execute and do the things that we have to do instead of like every time we jump on a call, I've got to convince you like this is working or this is how long it's going to take. Like we're just wasting time. Took me a long time to get there.
I love what you just said, and I'm gonna clip the hell out of it. I'm gonna share it everywhere. But like, yeah, I'm not, as a fractional CMO, like I'm not here to sell you on marketing. Like I'm assuming you're talking with me because you need marketing and you need somebody who knows the ropes, right?
Yep.
I love that. That's perfect. You can find Ron on LinkedIn. It's RON LATZ. Did I get that right?
Got
It's
it.
an easy spelling name, but I never underestimate how bad my spelling is sometimes. But you can find him on LinkedIn. His company is called Legal Phoenix. Yeah, so follow him. Follow him on YouTube, TikTok if you're on there. And thank you so much for being on, Ron.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Tiffany.